The wind had a name in the northern Great Plains. It was a cold name, one it shouted down from the mountains without pause, carrying red dust that was older than any man's memory. The dust settled on everything in Red Bluff, a town that was little more than a collection of hopeful lumber and false fronts huddled against the empty, rolling land. It was a place built on a promise, or maybe a threat, whispered from the east. That whisper had a name: 2 Railroad. It was a time somewhere between the 1850s and the 1890s, an age of iron and steam that had not yet arrived, but sent a long, cold shadow before it. Red Bluff sat on the very edge of that shadow, and on the edge of something else. Westward, the land changed. It smoothed itself into endless hunting grounds, sacred hills, and secret valleys that belonged, by a right older than maps, to the Lakota. Law in Red Bluff was a flimsy thing, tailored to fit the man who spoke loudest or carried the heaviest reputation. A man's honor was his currency, and rumor was the town banker in this raw, unfinished world. Eleanor Hale, known as Nora, worked the land her father had claimed and her husband had died trying to tame. Nora was a woman of more than 25 years, though the son in the worry had tried to add more. She was a woodsman's widow, left with a mortgaged farm, a surprising skill for reading survey maps, and a practical mind that saw the world for what it was, not what she wished it to be. She understood soil, water, and the precise weight of debt. Her goal was not grand, it was desperate. She meant to redeem, to buy back, the family land from the foreclosure that hung over it like a winter cloud. Miles away, yet under the same enormous, indifferent sky, Thade Wiyaka moved across the land. He was a Lakota warrior, a man of 27 winters, who had once served as a messenger, earning the name Feather of Wind for the way he seemed to ride with the air itself, unseen and swift. He was not a chief, but his voice carried weight. His purpose was as clear as the water he sought to protect to keep the grazing lands and the springs of the Moonwater Valleys safe for his people, for the bison they followed, and for the generations yet to come. The shadow that stretched toward Red Bluff had a source: Silas Creed. His name was on the new, unopened land office, on the biggest saloon, and on the lips of men who dreamed of quick wealth. Creed was a builder of railroads and a collector of land. He did not see the grass, the water, or the people. He saw a map, and on that map, the gentle, well-watered expanse of Moonwater Valley looked to him like the perfect place for a freight hub. The air was sharp with the coming cold one afternoon when Nora rode back from town. The wind pulled at her hat and whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks with the fine red grit. She was tired. The long-horned cattle she had spotted in the distance, a gray-brown river flowing over the hills, were a reminder of a wealth that was not hers. She dismounted at her small cabin, the pine logs silvered by weather, and saw the paper nailed to her door. It was not the first, but this one was different. It was not a request, it was a final notice. She tore it free, the nails scraping the wood. Her eyes scanned the dense legal writing, but her mind snagged on the clear, simple parts, the parts meant to be understood. 60 days. If the full amount of the debt was not paid within 60 days, the farm, her father's homestead, would be forfeit. The property would revert to the holder of the note, and at the bottom, stamped in stark black ink, was the name of that holder, the Red Bluff Land and Rail Company, Silas Creed, president. A coldness that had nothing to do with the wind settled in her stomach. 60 days. She looked out at the land, her land, the small pasture, the sturdy cabin, the creek that ran down toward the valley. It was not just dirt, it was freedom. It was her dignity. And Silas Creed thought he could take it for a few lines on a paper. That same day, that Wiyaka was not looking at paper, he was looking at stone. He had come to the edge of Moonwater Valley, a place where the air felt different, softer, a place his ancestors had marked with stones laid in a pattern that spoke to the sky. Or they had. A young rider from his camp had found him 2 days prior, his horse lathered, his words tumbling out in alarm. The marker stones, the sacred ones on the valley's rim, they were moved. Now, Wiyaka stood where the circle had been. The stones, heavy with meaning, were not just moved. They were pulled up, cast aside, left naked on the wrong grass. In their place were new markers. Not stone, but wood. Sharp, freshly cut stakes of pine, driven deep into the earth. And on the flat, shaved top of one, a black painted number. He knelt, touching the bruised earth where a sacred stone had rested. He felt the violation like a blow. This was not the random work of a hunter. This was measured. This was the careful, arrogant work of men who cut the world into squares, who believed a wooden stake held more power than a stone placed by grandfathers. Surveyors. He rose, his face hard as he looked down the line of stakes. They pointed like a knife into the heart of the valley, straight toward the spring. He knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, what this meant. The railroad, the iron snake the elders spoke of, was turning its head toward their water. His purpose, once a steady rhythm of protection, now became a sharp, urgent beat. He would not let this stand. A few days later, driven by a restlessness she could not name, Nora rode out. She left the damning letter hidden in her empty flour bin, but its weight rode with her. She followed her creek, the one that gave her cabin life, tracing it down toward its source. The creek was a boundary, and she knew she was close to it. She carried one of her father's old maps, a thing of careful, hand-drawn lines, checking it against the lay of the land. If she lost the farm, she thought, where would she go? The thought felt like choking on dust. The land opened up, and the creek widened, pooling in a shallow, sandy bend shaded by cottonwoods. She heard a splash, a sharp cry. It was not the cry of a hawk. It was a child. Through the trees, she saw it. A Lakota child, a boy no older than 6 or 7 winters, was struggling in the water. His pony, spooked by a rabbit perhaps, was already disappearing into the brush. The boy had fallen, and while the water was not deep, he had struck his head on a rock. He was dazed, coughing, trying to stand and falling back. Nora did not think. She slid from her horse, her feet hitting the soft bank. "It is all right," she said, her voice low and calm, though she knew he might not understand her words. "I am here to help." The boy's eyes, wide with fear and pain, fixed on her. He was Lakota. She was white, in red bluff. That was a line drawn deeper than any creek, but here there was only a child who was hurt. She waded in, the cold water soaking her boots and the hem of her skirt. She reached him, her hands gentle as she touched his arm. He flinched, but did not pull away. A cut on his forehead was bleeding freely, the red mixing with the muddy water. "Let us get you out of the cold," she murmured. She helped him to the bank, sitting him on a dry patch of grass, with movements that were practiced and sure. She tore a strip from her own clean petticoat, dipped it in the creek upstream, and gently, carefully, washed the grit from the wound. The boy watched her, his small body tense, but he did not cry. She used another strip of cloth to make a soft pressure bandage. She pointed to herself. "Nora!" She pointed to him. He said nothing, just stared with those dark, assessing eyes. She smiled, a small, tired smile. "Well, your pony is long gone. I think you and I are going to have to ride double on mine." She did not know she was being watched. From a ridge high above the creek, hidden by pine and shadow, that Wiyaka had seen the whole thing. He had been tracking the surveyors, his heart a cold stone of anger. He saw the riderless pony first, a sign of trouble. Then he saw the boy, his own cousin's son. His hand had gone to the knife at his belt as he saw the white woman approach, his body tensed, ready to ride down. A protector. But he waited. He watched. He saw her slide from the horse, not with aggression, but with purpose. He heard the murmur of her voice. too low to understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of a mother, of a sister. He watched her wade into the water, watched her tend the boy's cut with a tenderness that was not faked. She used her own clothing to bandage him. She did not rush. She was not afraid. And she did not harm. When she lifted the boy and began to walk toward her own horse, Wiyaka let his hand fall from his knife. He stayed on the ridge, a silent guardian. He watched her mount, settling the boy in front of her. He watched her ride away, not toward Red Bluff, but in the direction of the Lakota camp, a direction she could only have known by guessing, or by a kindness that trusted the boy to guide her. Thete Wiyaka did not show himself, but he marked the woman's face in his mind. He saw her practical, worn clothing, the way she sat a horse, and the gentle strength in her hands. She was not like the men who drove wooden stakes into the earth. He turned his horse away, back toward the desecrated stones. The fight was still coming, but the world, he was reminded, was not as simple as one color against another. Some things were more important than lines on a map or the color of a man's skin. Things like water, things like dignity, and the courage to help a child who had fallen. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if gold or water would prove more precious. The 60 days sat on Nora's chest like a stone. Every morning she woke with the number, and every night she went to bed with it. It was a countdown to her own extinction. Her father's farm, her only anchor in a world that had taken everything else, would be gone. There was only one man in Red Bluff who dealt in sums large enough to solve her problem, and he was the problem himself. Still, she put on her least worn dress, tied her hair back with a severe, practical knot, and walked into the Red Bluff Land and Rail Company office. It smelled of new leather and expensive cigar smoke. Silas Creed did not look like a man who belonged in a dusty frontier town. He wore a waistcoat, a clean shirt, and a smile that was as smooth and polished as the oak desk that separated him from the world. He stood when she entered, a performance of manners. "Mrs. Hale, an honor. What can I do for you?" Nora did not waste time. She laid the notice on his desk. I need an extension, or work. I can pay, but I need time." Creed looked at the paper, then at her. His eyes were a pale, assessing gray. "Time, Mrs. Hale, is the one thing I do not trade in. It is the raw material of progress." He steepled his fingers. "Work, however, that is a different story." He explained, the railroad needed timber. Thousands of felled trees, hauled from the high country down to the preliminary grading site. It was hard work. Teamster work. "I can handle a team," Nora said flatly. "My husband taught me. I can haul." Creed smiled. "I am sure you can." He produced a contract. It was thick with words. "This is a simple hauling agreement. You will be paid by the load. With the bonus I am offering for speed. A woman as resourceful as you could pay off that note in half the time." Nora's eyes scanned the pages. She was good with maps, not with the looping, treacherous language of lawyers. She saw the figures. She saw the payment schedule. It was fast money. It was, she thought, her only hope. Her fingers stopped on one small clause. It mentioned securing right of passage and utilizing all necessary routes to ensure timely delivery, with a specific mention of the lands adjoining the Moonwater Valley. "What does this mean, right of passage?" Creed waved a hand, dismissing the question. "Standard language, my dear. It simply means you have our full authority to use the most direct route. No one will stop you. You are working for the railroad. After all, you are working for progress." She looked at his smooth face, then at the number on her foreclosure notice. She picked up the pen. The ink was a dark, final black. She signed her name, Eleanor Hale. While Nora was signing her future to his paper, Thete Wiyaka was watching Creed's present work. He had followed the line of wooden stakes for a full day. They did not waver. They ran straight across the open plain, cutting through the shallow draws and over the low ridges. They led him to a place he knew as well as his own face, the Great Bison Trail. It was a path worn wide and deep by centuries of migration, a road made by the hoof and the herd, the artery of life for his people. And on that path, driving new stakes, were 3 white men. They were not alone. 4 others, carrying rifles and wearing the hard, careless look of hired guards. Watch them work. Wiaka rode forward slowly, his hands empty and visible. The surveyors stopped. The guards turned, their rifles coming up slightly. "This is not your land to mark," Wiaka said. His voice was calm, but it carried in the vast quiet. The leader of the guards, a burly man with a sunburnt face, spat a stream of tobacco juice. "This land belongs to the railroad. Chief, we got the paper to prove it. You and your kind best move on." "This is the path of the bison," Wiaka said, ignoring the taunt. "It is the path of our hunt. You cannot build here." "We can build wherever Mr. Creed tells us to build," the guard said, his thumb tapping the stock of his rifle. "Now, I said move on. This is your only warning." One of the younger surveyors looked nervous. His hammer held frozen in the air. The other guards fanned out. Wiaka was 1 man. They were 7. He looked at their faces, saw the blank, paid-for certainty. He saw the stakes, driven into the heart of the trail. To fight here, now, was to die for nothing. He held the man's gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pulled his horse's head around. He did not run. He rode away with a stiff, controlled dignity. But inside him, a cold fire was building. The paper they spoke of was a lie, and that lie was now choking the life from his land. Nora's first haul was a brutal education. The logging camp was high, the air thin, the work heavy. But she did it. She loaded her wagon, wrestled the team, and began the long, slow journey down the newly marked direct route. The route, she discovered with a sinking feeling, was little more than a suggestion. A line of fresh cuts through the brush that led her straight toward the Moonwater Valley. She was nearing the creek, the same one where she had found the boy. When she heard the shouting, it was English, loud and angry, and it was answered by defiant, high-pitched Lakota. She pulled her team to a halt and moved forward on foot, pushing through a stand of willow. It was the guards, 3 of them, the same men Wiaka had faced. They had cornered 2 Lakota youths, boys really, no older than 16. The boys had been hunting. A pair of rabbits was slung over one shoulder. One of the guards was holding a beautifully beaded quiver, holding it just out of the Lakota boy's reach. "Look at this, boys." The guard was sneering. "Pretty. Think I'll give it to my girl back in Chicago." "Some give it back," the Lakota youth shouted, his hand on the knife at his belt. "It was my father's." "Or what?" the guard taunted. "You'll scalp me." He shoved the boy. The boy shoved back. The guard's friends laughed. The first guard raised his fist. "That is enough," Nora's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear as a pistol shot. All 5 men froze, turning to look at her. The guard holding the quiver looked annoyed. "Ma'am, this is railroad business. Best you move along." "That is not railroad business," Nora said, stepping into the clearing. She was terrified. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "That is theft. Give him back his property." The guard laughed. "Or what? Little widow you gonna make me?" He took a step toward her. The Lakota boys tensed, their hands on their knives. Nora stood her ground, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. A new voice spoke, from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was quiet, but it stopped everyone. Cold. "He will give it back." Thady Wiaka emerged from the trees on the other side of the clearing. He did not look at Nora. His eyes were on the guard. He had been tracking the same party, and had found this. He stepped between the guard and the boys. He spoke in Lakota, a short, sharp command. The boys, though still angry, lowered their hands. Wiyaka looked at the guard. "You are on Lakota land. You are interfering with our hunters. And you are stealing. Give him the quiver." The guard, faced with a warrior now, not just boys, and with a white woman as a witness, seemed to shrink. He was still armed, but the fun had gone out of the game. He looked at Wiyaka, at Nora, and at his friends. Nora saw her chance. "He is right," she said, her voice aimed at the other two guards. "We are here to haul timber, not to start a war over a quiver. Mister, Creed will not be happy if we are delayed by a stupid fight." The mention of Creed, of being delayed, seemed to work. The other guards shifted. "Come on, Hank," one of them muttered. "It ain't worth it." Hank, the leader, glared. He looked at Wiyaka, his eyes full of hate, but he threw the quiver on the ground. "Indian trash." He turned to his men. "Let's go. We're wasting time." They pushed past Nora, their shoulders hitting the willow branches, and stomped back toward the surveyor's line. The clearing was suddenly intensely quiet. The two Lakota boys grabbed the quiver and, with a last look at Wiyaka, disappeared into the trees. Nora was left alone, facing the man she had seen on the ridge. He turned to her. His face was severe, his eyes dark and unreadable. He was the man who had watched her, the man whose people she was, apparently now working against. "You should not be here," he said. His English was precise. "I have a contract," Nora said, finding her voice. "I am hauling timber for the railroad." His eyes flickered to her wagon, visible through the trees. "For Creed." It was not a question. You help his men mark the land. Now you haul the trees that will lie on it. "I am trying to save my farm," she said, a flash of anger rising through her fear. "I am a widow. I have a debt." "What would you know about that?" "I know about debt," he said, his voice low. "And I know about land. Your progress is a wooden stake driven through the heart of the trail. It is an iron snake that will poison the water." "And your tradition will not pay the note on my farm," she shot back. "I am doing what I must to survive, just like you." He looked at her, a long, searching look. The anger in his face softened, just slightly, replaced by something else, a kind of weary understanding. He respected her honesty. He saw that she was not like the guards. She was not driven by hate, but by need. "Your survival," he said, "is tied to the man who is ending ours." He gestured to the path the guards had taken. "They will be back. This is not a safe place for you, or for me." He turned and, as silently as he had arrived, he was gone. Nora was left standing in the quiet, her hands still shaking, the echo of his words ringing in her ears. The rumor started that night. The guards, back in Red Bluff, told their story. They made it a grand tale of how they had faced down a dozen Lakota warriors, and how the Hale widow had interfered, talking soft to the chief. When Nora went to the mercantile for supplies 2 days later, the air in the store chilled. Mrs. Davies, who had always shared a word about the weather, suddenly found a sack of flour intensely interesting. The men at the bar fell silent, watching her. She heard one of them whisper, "That's her, Hale's widow, gone soft on the Lakota." She paid for her goods, her cheeks burning, and left. The isolation felt as cold and sharp as the wind. She was, she realized, truly alone. A week later, she was back in Creed's office to deliver her hauling vouchers and get her next set of instructions. Creed was not there, but his assistant told her to wait. She stood awkwardly in the room, feeling out of place in her dusty work clothes. On the wall, where a picture might be, was a map. It was a huge, detailed surveyor's map, the master plan for Red Bluff and surrounding territories. Her eyes, trained by her father, were drawn to it. She could not help but read it. She saw the town. She saw her own farm, a small square marked for acquisition. She saw the line of the railroad, a thick black scar. It ran right where she had been hauling, right where she had met Wiyaka. It cut straight through the Moonwater Valley. Her eyes followed the line, and then she saw it. A small, shaded area, right on the path of the proposed line. The surveyors had marked it useless mounds, grade level. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that spot. Her father had taken her there once, years ago. He had told her it was an old place, a holy place, a Lakota burial ground. He had told her to always show it respect. Creed's line did not respect it. It ran right over it. She looked at her contract, clutched in her hand. Rite of passage. She had been hauling the timber that would be used to build the bridges and lay the ties. Her wagons, her work, were the first step in desecrating a graveyard. The cost of her contract, she realized with a sickening lurch, was not just her own dignity. Miles away, in a lodge lit by the low flame of a central fire, Dede Wiyaka sat with the elders. The air was thick with smoke and worry. An old man, his face a map of wisdom and sorrow, spoke. "The soldier chiefs in the east gave us paper," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "The paper said Moonwater was ours, that the Bison Trail was ours. The paper, it seems, has forgotten its own words." He looked at Wiyaka. "These new stakes are not like the ones before. They are a promise. The iron snake is coming. If it crosses the sacred stones, if it drinks from the Moonwater, the bison will leave. The water will die. And we will have to take our families, our children, and our old ones, and go to the cold, empty lands in the north." He placed a hand on Wiyaka's shoulder. "You are feather of wind. You must be our voice. You must tell them, but you must also be our shield. If they will not listen, we must be prepared to leave." The weight of generations settled on Wiyaka. It was not just land. It was his people's home. It was their graves. It was their future. That night, Nora stood at her cabin door, the useless contract in her hand, looking at the sliver of moon. She felt trapped, ashamed, and angry. She had signed her name to a desecration. On a hill overlooking the valley, Wiyaka stood, watching the same moon. He saw the faint lights of the surveyor's camp, a small, ugly star near the sacred stones. He felt the warning of the elder like a brand. They were separated by a gulf of culture, of language, of history. But in that moment, they were united. They both stared into the darkness and saw the same enemy. Not each other, but the cold, relentless, and all-consuming greed of Silas Creed. Silas Creed's polished smile was a mask, and the man who arrived in Red Bluff 3 days later was the face beneath it. His name was Asher Pike. He was a man built of gristle and cold certainty, with eyes the color of a wet, gray rock. He wore the remnants of an old cavalry uniform, the buttons changed but the fit still retaining a military stiffness. He had been a gray shirt, a soldier who specialized in clearing hostile territory, and he had been hired by Creed for that exact purpose, to clear all obstacles. Pike did not smoke cigars, and he did not smile. He set up his office not in the land company, but in a tent at the surveyor's camp, which he promptly turned into a base of operations. His first act was not one of violence, but of legal, crushing force. He took Nora's signed contract to the new sheriff, a man already on Creed's payroll, and had it filed as a public document. Then he posted a notice on the door of the saloon, where every man in town would see it. The notice declared, "By authority of the Red Bluff Land and Rail Company and its duly signed contractor, Mrs. Eleanor Hale," that the Hale hauling route was the official and legal path of commerce. It cut, by name, directly through the Moonwater Valley. Nora's signature, given in desperation, had been twisted into a weapon. She was no longer just a hauler. She was the legal justification for the invasion. Pike's crew was different from the first. They were not just surveyors. They were blasters. They carried dynamite. Their job was to test the bedrock for the footings of a bridge that would cross the river and enter the valley. The first explosion was a thing of violence. It was not a distant rumble. It was a physical blow. A punch to the gut of the land itself. The sound cracked against the sky, sending birds scattering for miles. The earth shook, a deep, sickening tremor that Nora felt in the soles of her boots. 5 miles away at her cabin, Tenderness was much closer. He was watching the camp from a high ridge when the ground leaped beneath him. He saw the plume of smoke and dust, a dirty fist rising from the earth near the riverbank. He knew, with a terrible certainty, what it meant. He rode hard, not to the camp, but to the spring, the sacred headwater of the Moonwater. The water, usually clear as air, was already turning cloudy. A fine, pale silt was bleeding into it from below. He followed the creek down, his heart a cold stone. He found them a mile downstream. Fish, the small, quick trout of the cold water, floating belly up on the surface. They were stunned, then dying. The blast had not just shaken the earth, it had cracked something deep within it. It had broken a vein. The land was bleeding. Nora saw them, too. Her route forced her to pass the creek, and the sight stopped her cold. She dropped the reins of her team and walked to the bank, her stomach churning. The dead fish drifted in the eddy. A silver, silent accusation. This was not about lines on a map. This was not about a graveyard she had only heard of. This was poison, here, now, floating in the water. She was standing there, her hands clenched, when Tenderness found her. He emerged from the cottonwoods so silently. He was simply there. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You," he said. The word was heavy with contempt. He looked at the dead fish, then at her. "Your contract. This is the progress you haul." "I did not know," she whispered, the words sounding hollow even to herself. "I did not know they would do this." "You did not want to know," he said, his voice cutting. "You signed his paper. You drive your wagon on his path. You are the shadow he casts." Tears of shame and anger burned in her eyes. "What choice did I have? He owns my land. He owns this town." "He does not own the water," Tenderness said. "He does not own the stone. He does not own the air." He looked at her, his gaze intense, as if trying to see inside her, to weigh her soul. He saw the genuine horror on her face, the way she looked at the dead fish as if they were kin. He saw the same woman who had tended his cousin's son. He made a decision. He did not know if it was right. He only knew that his own ways, the ways of silence and watching, were failing. "Come," he said. She hesitated. "Where?" "To see what you have signed." He turned and walked, not waiting to see if she would follow. After a moment, she did. She left her team, her contract, her entire life, standing on the trail, and followed him. He led her up from the creek, away from the path of the wagons, onto a high, wind-swept ridge. The air was cleaner up here, the world vast and empty. And in the center of the ridge, in a wide, clear circle, were the stones. They were the stones he had found displaced. Some were as tall as a man, others small, but all were placed with a purpose Nora could feel, a purpose that hummed in the air. The wooden stakes of the surveyors were still there, a grotesque, angular intrusion into the ancient circle. Tenderness walked to the center. He did not look at her. He looked at the desecrated stones. "This is the place," he said. "Before my grandfather's grandfather. This is where we have always come to listen. The stones mark the edge of the sky. The center marks the heart of the earth." He pointed down into the valley, toward the spring she could not see. "Down there is the source. Our name for it is Tenderness, the breath of the moon. Not because it comes from the moon, but because it breathes with the land. It is the life, the blast you heard. It hurt the breathing." He touched one of the great stones, his hand gentle, as if on a living thing. "My people believe that as long as these stones stand, the breath will continue. The water will be sweet. Your Mr. Creed, his surveyors, they pulled them up. They drove stakes. They do not see the heart. They see only bedrock. Nora looked at the circle, at the violent wooden stakes, at the man who stood guarding a memory she had never known existed. She thought of the map on Creed's wall, the words, useless mounds. She thought of the dead fish, their silver bodies a silent scream. The shame was a physical thing, a sickness in her stomach. "He used me," she said, her voice a low, rough thing. "I saw the map. I knew. I saw it ran over the burial grounds, and I kept hauling." She finally looked at him, her eyes clear and full of a new, cold fire. "I was a fool. I thought I was saving my farm. I was helping him destroy yours." She walked to one of the wooden stakes and pulled at it. It was driven deep. She put her boot to it, her whole body, and wrenched it from the earth. The sound of the wood splitting, the earth releasing it, was small, but final. She threw it. "He can have the farm," she said, her voice shaking but hard. "He can take it, but he will not have this. I will not be his shadow." Her resolution was tested faster than she knew. When she returned to her wagon, Asher Pike was waiting for her. He was leaning against her wheel, one of her dead trout dangling from his hand. He dropped it at her feet. "Wasting company time. Mrs. Hale and consorting with the hostiles. Mr. Creed will be very displeased." "Take my contract," Nora said, her voice flat. "I quit. I will not haul another load. What you are doing, it is poisoning the water. It is wrong." Pike laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "Wrong, ma'am. Wrong is a word for preachers. This is business. This is progress. And you are a part of it." He held up a copy of the notice. "Your signature is on every bridge piling and every rail spike we drive. You quit. You do not get to quit. You are in breach." "I do not care. I will not do it." Pike stopped smiling. He pushed himself off the wheel and stepped toward her, his shadow falling over her. He was not a man of words. Like Creed, he was a man of endings. "You fight this, Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice a low growl. "And you lose everything. I do not mean just the farm. I mean everything. The good people of Red Bluff already think you are a soft woman. We will make sure they know you are a traitor. And out here, accidents happen. Wagons tip. People get lost. People get caught in the river." He looked past her, toward the trees where Wiyaka had disappeared. "You pick your side, widow, but you should know, the side you are looking at, it has already lost." He turned and walked away, leaving her with the threat, the dead fish, and the impossible weight of her decision. The sky, as if hearing Pike's threat, broke 2 days later. A hard, cold rain swept down from the mountains, turning the dust to a thick, red glue and the river to a churning, angry brown. Pike's men did not stop. They were working on a temporary wooden bridge, a thing of raw pine, trying to span the narrowest, fastest part of the river. Nora, her contract still legally binding, was forced to haul logs to them. She sat on her wagon, numb, watching them. The river was a monster. It pulled and tore at the new pilings. A young worker, a boy from back east with no business being there, was trying to secure a cable. He slipped on the wet logs. The yell was thin, lost in the roar of the water. He fell. He was swept down, but his foot tangled in the very cable he was trying to fix. Caught, he was trapped, his head just above the churning water, the full force of the river trying to pull him under. Pike was on the bank, shouting, "Cut the cable, cut it loose, it is dragging the piling." He was watching his bridge, not his man. "He will drown," another worker yelled. "Then he will drown," Pike roared back. "Cut the cable." Nora was already moving. She had jumped from her wagon, grabbing a coil of rope she kept for emergencies. She ran to the bank, but it was too far. The current was too strong. Then, he was there, that Wiyaka. He had been watching, drawn by the sounds of the disaster, a grim witness. He did not look at her. He looked at the river, at the boy. He understood the water. He saw what she was doing. He saw the rope. He saw it was not enough. He pointed, a sharp, quick gesture. "There, throw it there, the water will take it." He ran, leaping onto a boulder that jutted into the current. He was a target. Pike's men saw him. "Indian one," yelled, raising a rifle. "No!" Nora screamed. "He is helping!" Wiyaka ignored them. He was a part of the storm, a part of the river. He used his long knife to cut a heavy branch, and with a grunt, jammed it into the rocks just upstream of the boy, creating a small, temporary break in the current's full power. It was just a few seconds, but it was enough. "Now!" he roared. Nora, her arms aching, threw the rope. She threw it not at the boy, but where Wiyaka had pointed. The eddy he had predicted caught it, sweeping the loop just within the boy's desperate reach. He grabbed it. "Pull!" Nora screamed, digging her heels into the mud. The other workers, shamed into action, grabbed the rope with her. Even Wiyaka, leaping back to the bank, put his hands on the rope. His strength added to hers. They pulled. The river fought them. For a terrible second, it was a stalemate. Then the boy's foot came free. They hauled him onto the bank, a half-drowned, gasping pile of terror. Pike strode over, his face black with rage. He looked at the boy, then at Nora, then at Wiyaka, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Get off this sight!" he snarled at Wiyaka. "And you," he said to Nora, his voice full of venom. "You have picked your side. Widow, I will not forget this." Nora stood, her chest heaving, soaked to the skin. Her conscience, which had been a dead, heavy thing, was suddenly, painfully alive. She met Pike's glare. "I am glad you will not," she said. Wiyaka was already gone. He had melted back into the trees, leaving only a cut branch and a saved life as proof he had been there. That night, Nora did not go home. She rode her horse to the ridge, to the sacred circle of stones. The rain had stopped. The moon was a sliver, its light a pale breath. He was there, as she knew he would be. He was replacing one of the stones the surveyors had moved. "The boy is alive," she said. "Yes," Wiyaka replied, not stopping his work. "Pike, he will come for me, and for you." "Let him," he settled the stone. "We saved a life. Today, that was enough." Nora walked to his side. "It will not be enough tomorrow." She looked at the cloudy, poisoned spring far below, then at the circle of stones around her. "You are right. This is not about paper. It is about the water. He will not stop. He will not listen." "I know," Wiyaka said. "Then we have to stop his work," Nora said, her voice quiet, but as hard as the stones he was moving. "My signature on his paper started this. My hands will help end it." Thede Wiyaka finally stopped. He turned and looked at her. He saw the mud on her skirt, the exhaustion in her face, and the steel in her eyes. He saw a woman who had lost everything and, in doing so, had found something to fight for. He did not offer her his hand. He did not smile. This was not a thing of friendship. It was an alliance, born of water and stone and the threat of an ending. "We will protect Moonwater," he said. Nora nodded, the single sharp movement sealing the pact. "We will protect Moonwater." Their pact, made on a dark ridge under a sliver of moon, was a fragile, desperate thing. It was a promise to protect, but they had no weapons, no law, and no time. Nora rode back to her cabin with the sun, the threat from Asher Pike a living thing at her heels. That Wiyaka returned to his camp to find the water from the spring still running with a pale, sickening cloud of silt. They both knew they could not do this alone. Wiyaka's first stop was his sister. Tala was older than him by 3 winters, a woman who held the knowledge of herbs and wounds, but also a quiet, steady wisdom that made her a leader without a title. He found her grinding dried choke cherries, her movements economical and precise. He told her about the blast. He told her about the dead fish. He told her about the white woman, Nora. Tala did not stop her grinding. "The water is sick," she said, her voice a low, calm rumble. "The earth has been wounded. This is not a thing of arrows. It is a thing of poison." "She wants to help," Wiaka said, the admission feeling strange in his mouth. "The woman who signed Creed's paper. The one who tended to Little Owl." Tala paused, looking at him. "A coyote will chew off its own leg to escape a trap. This does not make it a wolf." "She is not a coyote," Wiaka said. "She pulled the stakes from the sacred circle. She faced Pike. She has the same enemy." "Then bring her," Tala said, resuming her work. "And bring me a sample of the water. Wounds must be seen to be understood, both the earth's and hers." Nora's first move was toward the law. She found Sheriff Amos Reed whitewashing the wall of his own small office, a task the town council refused to pay a handyman for. Reed was a man past 60, his face lined with the compromise and disappointment of a long career on the frontier. He was, Nora knew, an honest man, which in Red Bluff made him a poor one. "Sheriff," she said, her voice drawing him from his work. He turned, his brush dripping. "Mrs. Hale, heard you were busy, out by the river. The rumor mill," she saw, had already done its work. "I was," she said, ignoring the implied judgment. "I am here because Asher Pike and his men have poisoned the Moonwater Spring. They're blasting. I saw the dead fish. Hundreds of them." Reed put his brush down. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "Poisoned, Mrs. Hale, or just muddied big difference in a court of law, which, I might add, Mr. Creed seems to own." "It is poisoned," she insisted. "And that is not all. I saw a map, Creed's map. He is running the rail line directly over the Lakota burial grounds, the ones by the ridge." Reed stopped, his weary eyes suddenly sharp. "He is what?" "And I believe he is doing it by fraud," Nora pressed, her words coming faster. "My father's maps, the old county surveys, they all showed that ridge as protected land, part of the treaty boundaries." "Showed," Reed said, seizing the word. "The new maps, the ones Creed filed at the county seat, show that boundary a half-mile east, makes that ridge unclaimed territory, makes it his." "Then the new maps are a lie." "It is a strong word, Mrs. Hale. A lie, a forgery. That is a matter for the county land assessor and Judge Harlan, both of whom, I hear, had a very expensive dinner with Mr. Creed last week." He looked at her, his conscience warring with his pragmatism. "I am one man, Nora. I have one deputy, and he is a fool. What you are asking is for me to take on the railroad. That is not a fight. That is a suicide." "I am not asking you to take him on," Nora said, her voice low. "I am asking you to find the truth. You are the sheriff. That is your job." Reed looked at his whitewashed wall, then at her. He picked up the brush. "I will look into it, quietly." It was not a commitment. It was a dismissal. She left his office feeling the cold, hard reality of her isolation. The law was a locked door. There was one more person, the boy they had pulled from the river. His name was Miguel Ortega. He was young, barely 20, and had come from a place so far south. This cold, high country must have felt like the moon. He owed them his life. Nora found him at the edge of the railroad camp, mending a harness, his arm in a crude sling from where the rope had burned him. He saw her, and his face lit with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Senora," he said, standing. Mrs. Hale," she corrected gently. "How is your arm?" "It is strong enough. I thank you. You and the Lakota man. You saved me. Pike. He would have let me drown." His dark eyes were full of a quiet shame. "He would have cut the cable." He would have, Nora said. Miguel, what they are doing, what Pike is doing, it is wrong. The blasting, it is killing the land. I know, Miguel whispered, looking around. The men, they talk. They say the water is bad. We are not to drink from it. Pike brings barrels from town, at great cost. He was a laborer. He understood cost. He knows what he did. I need your help, Nora said. Miguel's face tightened. Senora, I am just a worker. I have nothing. You have your eyes, she said. You are inside his camp, Pike and Creed. They are moving too fast. They are cutting corners. They must be keeping records, logs, something, a blasting schedule, a payroll, anything that proves they knew what they were risking. To be a spy, he said, the words tasting like ash. They would kill me. They would have let you die, she countered. I am not asking you to steal, just to see, to listen, for the sake of the water, for the sake of the men who do not know they are drinking poison. He looked at his feet, at the red dust, then back at her. He nodded. One sharp, terrified movement. The team was formed. A widow with a map, a warrior with a purpose, a healer with wisdom, a sheriff with a flicker of conscience, and a laborer with his eyes open. Their first task was the water. Nora, guided by Wiyaka, went to Tala's camp. It was a collection of lodges in a hidden fold of the plains, protected from the wind. Wiyaka spoke to his sister, and Tala looked at Nora, her gaze flat and assessing. Nora offered the older woman a small bag of tobacco, a sign of respect her father had taught her. Tala accepted it, then looked at the jar of cloudy water Nora had brought. The healer dipped a finger in, rubbed the silt, and smelled it. She shook her head. It is as I feared. Tala said, the rock powder. It is not just mud. It cuts the insides. The fish die first, then the deer, then the men. Can we fix it? Nora asked. The earth heals slowly, Tala said, but we can give it a path. The water must be turned away from the wound, a new channel, to let the silt settle before it reaches the main river. It was a massive undertaking. Wiyaka gathered his men, the ones who trusted his judgment. Miguel, his conscience now his master, brought 3 other railroad workers who had grown sick of Pike's brutality and bad water. Nora brought her wagon, her shovels, and her own unyielding determination. They met at the spring. It was the first time. Lakota warriors, their faces stern, stood next to Irish and Mexican laborers, their expressions wary. It was an alliance that should not have existed. Tala marked the path, using the land's own contours. Wiyaka organized the teams, and for 3 days, they dug. It was brutal, back-breaking work. The sun beat on them. The red mud was a thick, pulling enemy. But as they worked, something changed. The silence, at first suspicious and hostile, gave way. Nora, working beside Tala, learned to use a hide scraper to line the new channel. Wiyaka and Miguel, their languages a clumsy mix of English, Spanish, and Lakota, found a rhythm, a shared grunt of exertion as they moved a boulder. They were building more than a ditch. They were building trust, one shovelful at a time. On the 3rd day, the water was turned. It flowed, slow and awkward at first, then steady, into the new path. It was a small victory, but it was theirs. The victory, however, was visible. Asher Pike rode out, saw the diversion, the mixed-race camp, the clear sign of defiance. He did not act. He simply watched, his gray eyes filled with a cold promise. He rode back to Red Bluff. The explosion was social. That night, the saloon was a tinderbox. Pike's men, paid in Creed's whiskey, told the story. The Widow Hale, one shouted, digging in the mud with him like an animal. It is a disgrace, another yelled. This town is supposed to be civilized, and she is out there, betraying her own kind, siding with savages against the railroad. The railroad is progress, barked the saloon owner, who had a new, unpaid-for mirror from Creed. "It is jobs. It is our future." A lone trapper in the corner, a man who had lived with the Lakota, spoke up. "That water is for all of us. The railroad ain't worth dirt if you cannot drink the water." A bottle flew. The saloon erupted. The town, which had been simmering with rumor, now boiled over into two clear, hateful sides: railroad and civilization versus free land and savages. When Nora rode into town the next day for flour, she was met with a wall of silence. No one would sell to her. She was an outcast. Creed, seeing his opportunity, made his move. He did not need Pike's violence. He had the law. He called an emergency session of the Red Bluff Town Council. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and reasonable, "we have a problem. The development of our great enterprise is being stalled, threatened, by a small band of malcontents and by an unfortunate legal entanglement." He produced Nora's contract. "This document, signed by Mrs. Hale, gives us right of passage, but she has gone astray. She has broken this contract, siding with the hostiles. We cannot let our progress be held hostage by one woman's confusion." He proposed a solution. "The Moonwater Valley is, by the new county maps, unincorporated land. I propose we, the council, vote to formally annex it, for the public good, to secure the water rights for the town. The railroad, of course, will manage this resource on your behalf." It was a blatant public theft. Sheriff Reed stood up. "You cannot do that, Silas," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "That land is protected by the 1868 treaty. I do not care what your new map says. The original plat map at the county seat will prove it." Creed smiled. "Will it? I think you will find the county assessor agrees with me." He looked at the council members. "All in favor of protecting our town's future." "I protest this," Reed said, his hand on his badge. "This is a fraud." "Your protest is noted. Sheriff," said the council president, a man who owned the lumber yard, "as is your recent lack of activity. You have failed to arrest the Lakota for trespassing. You have failed to stop the destruction of railroad property, namely, the digging of that ditch. In light of this, the council is asking you to take a temporary leave of absence. To rest. Your deputy will take your duties." Reed was stunned. He was fired. He looked at the faces of the men he had known for 20 years. He saw greed. He saw fear. He saw nothing for him. He unpinned his badge, laid it on the table, and walked out. The law was gone. Nora, hearing the news, felt a despair she had not known since her husband's death. The farm was gone. Her name was Mud. The law had abandoned them. She went to her cabin and sat, the silence of the room pressing in on her. She had nothing left. She saw her father's old journal on the shelf, his precise, scientific notes about the land. She picked up her own, the one she kept her meager accounts in. She opened it to a clean page. She picked up a pen. If the law would not listen, if the town would not see, she would write. She would be a witness. She did not write about the land dispute. She wrote about the sound of the wind in the high pines. She wrote about the taste of dust and the desperation that made a woman sign a bad contract. She wrote about the line of misses. Davies is back in the mercantile, and the cost of progress when it is paid by women who have no voice in the council meetings. The next day, she tore the page out. She rode to the small, clapboard office of the Red Bluff Chronicle. She gave it to the editor, a small, ink-stained man named Abernathy, who hated Silas Creed for reasons of his own. "Print this," she said, "but do not put my name on it." Weaka, meanwhile, faced his own council. The victory of the ditch was short-lived. Some of the younger warriors were restless. "We dig in the dirt like women," one named Red Owl said, his face angry. "And Pike's men laugh. Creed steals our land with paper. We should fight, burn his camp, take back the valley." "And then what?" Weaka countered. "The soldiers come, more soldiers. We have seen this. It is a fight we lose, and we lose everything. So we do nothing, Red Owl challenged. We let them take the water, the graves of our fathers. No, Wiyaka said. We are not doing nothing. The woman, Nora, she is fighting them with their own weapons. Paper, words. She believes the original map, the true map, can stop them. A white woman's paper, Red Owl spat. It is a lie. Perhaps, Wiyaka said. But it is a lie they believe in. We have given the water a new path. Now we must give the truth a new path. He was torn. The warrior in him screamed for the raid Red Owl proposed. It was a clean, honorable path. This new way, this digging through dusty county offices, this trusting a white woman and a weary sheriff. It felt slow. It felt weak. He left the council, the argument unresolved. He went to the sacred stones, the circle he had rebuilt with Nora. He sat, letting the cold wind of the high plains clear his head. He was a warrior. He was a protector. But he did not know, in this new battle, what those words even meant. He was caught, not between two worlds, but between two ways of fighting. One was a glorious, certain death. The other was a slow, uncertain hope. The sky had been a pale, sick yellow for 2 days, the air still and heavy. Then the wind came. It did not come as a breeze, it came as a wall. It was a solid thing of red dust and screaming air that struck the northern Great Plains like a fist. The sandstorm was a monster without a mind, a third force in the battle for Moonwater. It tore at Red Bluff, ripping shingles from roofs and turning noon into a terrifying, suffocating midnight. It flattened Asher Pike's canvas tent camp as if it had never been, scattering equipment and blasting powder, and sending his men cowering into muddy ditches. It howled through the Lakota camp, tearing at the lodgepoles and forcing Tala to move her patients and herbs into the deepest, most protected caves. The world was blind. The world was chaos. And in that chaos, Asher Pike saw his chance. He was a man who thrived on disorder. While his men huddled, he and 2 others he trusted, men as hard and empty as himself, saddled their horses. They tied cloths over their faces, not just against the dust, but against being seen. They did not ride to save the camp. They rode into the teeth of the storm, using the screaming wind as a cloak. Wiyaka was working to secure a lodge for an old woman when Red Owl found him. The warrior's face was a mask of grit and panic. It is Tala. She is gone. The storm had ripped the hide covering from the cave where she kept her supplies. She had gone out to secure it, and she had not returned. At first, they thought the wind had taken her, that she was lost. But then Wiyaka found the tracks, already fading, the tracks of shod horses, white men's horses, and a rope, cut, lying in the mud. He returned to his lodge, the world turning red before his eyes, and found the message. A piece of paper, a white man's weapon, was pinned to his own lodge pole with a skinning knife. It was weighted, not just by the knife, but by one of Tala's own medicinal pouches. The words were crude, written in charcoal. You want the woman. You give up the land. Come to Devil's Notch. Come alone. Sign the paper. Pike had used the storm. He had taken the one person Wiyaka could not live without. He had taken the camp's healer. Nora felt the storm in her cabin, the logs groaning, the red dust finding its way through every crack until the air itself was thick and tasted of dirt. She was trapped, her world reduced to the 4 walls of her home. When the wind finally eased, on the 3rd day, the world outside was a new, alien landscape. Drifts of red sand were piled against her barn, and the creek was running thick as paint. She was checking on her horse when Miguel Ortega rode up, his face gaunt, his horse nearly spent. "Senora," he said, his voice cracking. "Pike, he has her. He has the healer. Tala." He had been at the camp, had seen Pike ride out, had heard the boasts when he returned. Pike had Tala, and he was sending a message to Wiyaka, demanding a full surrender. a signature on a document that gave Creed everything. "Where?" Nora said, her voice a flat, hard thing. "Devil's Notch," Miguel said. "He is holed up there. He says Wiyaka comes alone, or he kills her." Nora's mind moved, sharp and fast. She was a mapmaker's daughter. She knew Devil's Notch. It was not a notch. It was a box canyon, a natural trap with one way in and one way out. Wiyaka would go. He would go alone, and Pike would kill him. Then Pike would kill Tala. "He will not go alone," she said. She grabbed her father's old rifle from its pegs. "Get a fresh horse from my barn. Miguel, we have to find him before he does something stupid." They found him not at his camp, but on the ridge, his horse pacing, his face a mask of such cold rage that Nora almost hesitated. He was not a peacemaker now. He was a warrior, stripped of everything but his purpose. "You cannot go," Nora said. "Riding up?" Wiyaka turned his dark eyes on her. "He has my sister." "And he will kill you both," she said, her voice as sharp as his. "It is a trap. Wiyaka, a box canyon. You ride in, and you die. That is his plan. He wants you to fight." "And I should do nothing," he roared, the sound torn from his gut. "Let him keep her sign his paper." "No," Nora said, her voice dropping, becoming intense. "You will not sign, and you will not fight. Not his way. We will get her back, but we will use this." She tapped her head. "We will use wits. Pike is a bully. He is expecting a warrior. He is not expecting a widow or a laborer." He looked at Miguel, then at her. He saw the rifle. "You would use violence." "I will use a warning," she said. "There is a difference." It took the rest of the day to reach the canyon. They left their horses miles back and crept on foot over the rock, the land scoured clean by the storm. From a high ledge, they looked down. It was just as she had feared. Devil's Notch. One way in. Pike had 2 men at the entrance. He himself was deeper inside, near a small campfire. And Tala, she was there. She was bound, hands and feet, sitting against the canyon wall. But there was something else. Miguel saw it first, his blood running cold. "Madre de Dios," he whispered. Next to Tala, stacked in a neat, terrifying pile, were 3 crates of dynamite, left over from the blasting. A single, long fuse was coiled beside them. "It is not just a trap for you, Wiyaka," Miguel said, his voice shaking. "It is a trap for everyone. If you attack, he lights the fuse. He will blow the canyon mouth, bury you all, and ride out the back. There is a high trail. For goats. He could climb it." Wiyaka's face was gray. Pike was not just threatening Tala. He was threatening to bring the mountain down. Nora looked at Wiyaka. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He was preparing to leap, to sacrifice himself. "No," she said, putting her hand on his arm. It was the first time she had touched him like this. Her hand was small against his muscle, but the pressure was firm. "We do this my way?" She laid out the plan. It was desperate. It was time to the second. It relied on 3 things: Miguel's knowledge of ropes, her own skill with a rifle, and Wiyaka's speed. Miguel, his fear forgotten, his debt to Tala foremost in his mind, slipped away into the dusk. He had a coil of rope from his saddle. He moved to the shadows just outside the canyon mouth, where the 2 guards stood. Nora chambered around. "When the guards are down, I will draw Pike's attention. That is your moment. Wiyaka, not for Tala, for the fuse. Do you understand the fuse first?" He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers in the twilight. He saw no fear. He saw only a terrible, cold resolve. He nodded. They waited. The minutes stretched, thick as molasses. Then, from the darkness below, came a strangled shout, a curse, and the heavy thud of 2 bodies falling. Miguel's rope, stretched taut between 2 boulders, had done its work. The guards were a tangled, confused heap. "Now," Nora whispered. She raised the rifle. She did not aim at Pike. She aimed at the rock 3 feet above his head. She fired. The shot was a flat crack in the small canyon, echoing a dozen times. Splinters of rock rained down, hitting Pike's hat. He yelled, startled, grabbing his own pistol and firing into the dark, exactly where she was not. "Wiyaka!" she screamed. He was already moving. He did not come from the front. He came from the side, a shadow moving down the rocks like water, silent and impossibly fast. Pike was still shooting at Nora's flash. Wiyaka landed, cat-light, 10 feet from the fire. Pike spun, his eyes wide with shock. He saw Wiyaka. He saw his plan failing. With a roar of rage, he lunged, not for his gun, but for a burning brand from the fire. He jammed it onto the fuse. The fuse sparked. It hissed. A small, angry, white light burning its way toward the crates. Nora screamed. Wiyaka did not go for Pike. He did not go for Tala. He launched himself across the ground, his knife already in his hand. He sliced. The blade cut through the fuse. A foot from the crates. The hissing stopped. A shot rang out. One of the guards, untangled, had fired. Wiyaka grunted, a sharp intake of breath. He spun, his knife now his only weapon. But Pike was already scrambling. He saw his plan was ruined. He ran, not for the fuse, but for the goat path. He and his remaining men fired into the shadows, a blind, panicked volley, and then they were gone, scrambling up the rocks, escaping into the night. Silence, heavy, stunned silence. "Tala," Wiyaka breathed. He ran to his sister, cutting her bonds. She was bruised, furious, but unharmed. She stood, rubbing her wrists, and looked at him. "You took your time," she said, her voice dry. Then he staggered. "The shot." "Wiyaka!" Nora cried, sliding down the rocks, Miguel just behind her. He was bleeding. The guard's bullet had torn through the flesh of his left arm, a deep, ragged gouge. They got him out of the canyon, back to a shallow cave where they had left their supplies. The adrenaline was fading, and he was pale, the blood a dark stain on his shirt. Nora tore a strip from her petticoat, the same one she had used for the child. "Tala, you must—" "He is your patient," Tala said, her dark eyes watching Nora. "You have a healer's hands. See to him." Nora's hands were shaking. She cleaned the wound with water from her canteen. It was deep. He sat, his back against the rock, his face rigid, not making a sound as the water stung the raw flesh. It is clean," she said, her voice unsteady. "The bullet went through." She took the cloth, her hands gentle, and began to wrap the arm, her touch firm and sure. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the scent of pine and smoke and the clean, sharp smell of him. Their faces were inches apart. He was watching her, his gaze so intense it was a physical touch. He was not looking at her as a white woman or a widow. He was looking at her as Nora. She tied the knot. Her fingers lingered for a second on his skin, a second that stretched into a small eternity. It was not a look of passion. It was a look of profound, stunned respect. It was a promise. He had trusted her plan. She had saved his sister. He had saved them all. She finally pulled her hands away, her face flushing in the dark. "We must rest," she said. As Wiyaka had lunged for the fuse, he had grabbed something else, Pike's saddlebag, dropped in his haste. Tala, her hands free, had picked it up. She now held it out. "He left this," she said. Wiyaka, his good hand, took it. He dumped the contents on the cave floor, a spare pistol, some jerky, and a book, a small, black leather ledger. Nora picked it up. It was not a journal. It was an account book. Her eyes, used to reading ledgers, scanned the pages. They were not lists of timber or supplies. They were lists of names. A. Pike, for clearing, $500. Sheriff B. Deputy, bonus, $50. J. Harlan, County Judge, retainer, $1,000. County Assessor, map revision, $200. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "Wiyaka," she whispered, her hands shaking. "It is all here. It is the proof. He did not just bribe them. He wrote it down." They rode back to Red Bluff before dawn. They did not go to the town. They went to the small, dark house behind the jail. They went to Amos Reed. They found him sitting in the dark, a cold cup of coffee and a bottle of whiskey on his table. He looked like a man who had lost his own soul. "Sheriff," Nora said, her voice gentle. "I am not the sheriff," he slurred. "You are tonight," she said. She placed the black ledger on the table in front of him. "Here is the lie. Here is the proof." Reed's eyes slowly focused. He picked up the book. He lit a lamp, his hands fumbling. He read for a very long time. The color drained from his face, replaced by a slow, burning red. He was not looking at a ledger. He was looking at his own failure, his own cowardice, written in black ink. "J. Harlan," he whispered. That son of a—" He stood up, knocking his chair over. He was no longer a drunk. He was a lawman. "This is it. This changes everything." He went to his old desk, the one he had taken from the office. He pulled out his old official county seal and a stick of red wax. "What are you doing?" Nora asked. "Sealing it," Reed said, his voice grim. "We take this to the district judge, not Harlan, the one in Deadwood. A document, sealed by an officer of the law, even a former one. They have to look at it. They have to open it in court." He wrapped the book in oilcloth, melted the wax, and pressed his seal into it. It was a heavy, official star. "At dawn," he said, strapping on his old gun belt. "We ride for Deadwood, Pike and Creed. They burned the wrong man. We have them." They rode out as the first pale light touched the sky. Wiyaka, Nora, and Amos Reed. They rode hard, the sealed book a heavy weight in Reed's saddlebag. As they crested the high ridge that led out of the valley, they stopped. Far in the distance, in the direction of Deadwood, a column of smoke was rising. It was too big. It was too fast. It was not a chimney. A lone rider, his horse lathered, was galloping toward them. He pulled up, his eyes wide with terror. "The courthouse," he yelled. "The county records office. It is gone. Someone burned it to the ground." Nora looked at Wiyaka, then at Reed. The sheriff's face was a mask of disbelief, then of slow, terrible understanding. Creed had not waited for them. He had not just burned the past, he had burned the proof. They rode toward the smoke, a rising black pillar that smeared the clean morning sky. It was not at Deadwood. It was at the Red Bluff County seat, the 2-story wooden courthouse that held every deed, every map, and every last hope of law in the territory. By the time they arrived, it was hell. The entire building was a roaring furnace, orange flames punching through the windows and licking at a sky already choked with ash. The whole town was there, a panicked, disorganized line of men and women passing useless buckets of water, their faces streaked with sweat and soot. The heat was a physical blow, driving them back. Sheriff Amos Reed, his badge now pinned firmly back on his chest, took one look and his weariness fell away. "Get a line to the well," he bellowed, his voice the law again. "And get the wagon's wet blankets on the roofs of the mercantile and the saloon, or we lose the whole town." People moved, grateful for a voice of authority. But Nora grabbed his arm. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "Amos, the fire. It is not an accident. It is Creed." Reed looked at her. He would not— "The map," she said, her voice a raw whisper. The original plat map, the proof you were looking for. He is burning the proof. Wiyaka, his injured arm a dull throb, had already seen it. He had seen Pike's men, not fighting the fire, but watching it, their faces lit with a grim satisfaction. They were here to make sure the job was done. "The map room," Nora said, her mind racing, visualizing her father's old drawings of the building. "It is on the ground floor, in the back. It might still be there." "It is a death trap, Nora," Reed said, grabbing her. "It is the only thing we have," she countered. She saw Miguel, his face a mask of terror, helping with the buckets. "Miguel!" He ran to her. "Señora, it is lost." "No, it is not," she said, her voice steel. She looked at Wiyaka. "He did this to stop us. We cannot let him." Wiyaka looked at the burning building, then at her. He saw the fire in her eyes match the one in the courthouse. He nodded. "Once." "Miguel, we need a way in the back," Wiyaka commanded. "Nora, you guide us. I will clear the path." Reed grabbed 2 axes from the fire wagon. "God help you all." They ran, not to the front, but down the alley, the smoke so thick they were instantly blind. It was a world of heat and noise. Wiyaka used an axe like a battering ram, smashing the back door, which was already smoldering. A wave of superheated air blasted them, singing their hair. "The left!" Nora screamed over the roar. "It is a hallway, 10 paces." Wiyaka went first, a shadow in the churning smoke. He moved with a speed that was not human, seeming to sense the falling timbers before they hit. The hallway was an inferno, but he was through it. Here! The map room. It was not yet fully ablaze, but the ceiling was sagging, and the far wall was a sheet of orange flame. The heat was unbearable, and in the center of the room, standing before a large metal map cabinet, was Asher Pike. He had a crowbar, and he was not trying to save the maps. He was trying to pry the cabinet open to let the fire in. He spun as they burst in, his face a mask of sweat and fury. "The widow," he snarled, dropping the crowbar. "And the chief. I should have known." He drew his pistol. Wiyaka did not hesitate. He threw the axe. It was not a warrior's throw. It was a desperate, powerful heave. It spun, end over end, striking Pike in the chest. It did not cut him, but the force of the blow sent him crashing backward, his pistol flying from his hand. "Miguel, the cabinet!" Nora yelled. Miguel, his fear burned away by adrenaline, grabbed the crowbar. The metal was scalding hot, but he wedged it in the drawer. "It is locked." "Pike!" Wiyaka shouted. He was on the man in a second, his good arm pulling Pike to his feet, his knife at the man's throat. "The key." Pike laughed, a choking, smoky sound. "Go to hell." Wiyaka looked at the fire, at Nora, at the melting lock. He did not have time. He slammed Pike against the wall, the man's head hitting the wood with a dull crack. Pike's eyes rolled back, and he slumped, unconscious. Wiyaka looked down at the man, at the knife in his hand. He could end it, end one part of this right here. "Wiyaka, he is a murderer, but you are not." It was Nora. She was watching him, her face full of smoke and a terrible plea. Wiyaka looked at Pike's unconscious face. He straightened. He put his knife away. "No, I am not." He turned back to the cabinet. Together, he and Miguel put their shoulders to the cabinet. It was heavy, old-world iron. They heaved. The fire roared. A living thing, now in the room with them. "It is no use," Miguel cried. His hands burned. "The drawers," Nora screamed. "Just the one the bottom county plats." Wiyaka jammed the crowbar into the lock. Using his full body weight, the lock splintered. He yanked the drawer open. It was a cloud of smoke. "I cannot see," Nora said, her eyes streaming. "It is a dark time for the rebellion." Wiyaka reached in, his bare hand closing on a thick roll of canvas. He pulled. It was the map. It was heavy. and it was on fire. The edges were smoldering, the canvas blackening, the old paper curling and turning to ash before their eyes. "My jacket!" Nora cried, ripping it off. She smothered the flames, her own hands pressing against the heat, beating at the embers. The fire was out, but the map was scorched, the edges gone. "The ceiling!" Miguel screamed. A huge beam, fully ablaze, cracked above them. Wiyaka grabbed Nora by the waist, pulling her and the map backward, rolling as the beam crashed where they had stood. "Now!" he roared. They ran. They burst out of the back door, falling into the alley, a tangle of smoke, ash, and scorched canvas. They were alive. They had the map. They staggered to the front. The crowd, seeing them emerge from the smoke like ghosts, fell silent. Amos Reed ran to them, his face a mix of disbelief and hope. You did it!" Nora, her hair half burned, her face black, held up the charred roll. "We did it!" A voice, cold and clear, cut through the stunned silence. "Arrest them!" Silas Creed. He was standing on the boardwalk of the Mercantile, untouched by the soot, his suit clean. He was not looking at the fire. He was looking at them. His deputy, the one who had replaced Reed, stepped forward, flanked by 6 of Pike's men, all now wearing the star of deputy. "Arrest them," Creed repeated, pointing a clean, manicured finger. "They are the ones who set the fire. I saw them. They did it to cover their tracks, to steal public records." The crowd, which had been cheering them a second before, now turned, its fear looking for a target. "What? They did it!" "It is a lie!" Nora shouted, her voice raw. "He is the liar! He burned it! We saved this!" "You saved it," Creed said, his voice dripping with mock pity. "Or you were saving it for yourself. We all know you have been siding with the hostiles. Mrs. Hale. We all know you have been digging on railroad land. This is an act of treason, of theft." The deputy, his hand on his new pistol, stepped toward them. "You are all under arrest, for arson, for theft of county property, and for the attempted murder of Mr. Pike, who is in there right now." "He is lying!" Reed roared, stepping in front of them. He held up the sealed ledger. "This is the truth. This is Creed's paybook. He bought the judge. He bought the assessor. He bought you." The deputy did not even look at it. He shoved Amos Reed to the ground. The sealed ledger flew from his hand, landing in the muddy street. "You have no authority, old man," the deputy sneered. "Now, give me the map." It was a standoff. Pike's men leveled their rifles. The town was frozen. Wiyaka looked at Nora, at Reed struggling in the mud, at the rifles. He knew this fight. This was the one he had been warned about. He bent, his good hand grabbing the ledger. His other hand grabbed Nora. "Tala," he said, a quiet word. His sister, who had been on the edge of the crowd, understood. "Run," Reed bellowed from the ground. Wiyaka did not need to be told. He shoved Nora toward the horses. Miguel, seeing his chance, grabbed a bucket and threw it, not with water but with mud, straight at the deputy. The man screamed, blinded. That was all the chaos they needed. Wiyaka, Nora, Miguel, and Reed scrambled for their horses. Pike's men fired, but the crowd was in the way. People screamed, diving for cover. They were on horseback in a second, galloping through the chaos, Wiyaka in the lead. They rode, not for Nora's farm, not for the road. They rode for the high country. They rode for the one place that was not Creed's. They rode for Moonwater Ridge. They did not stop until the horses were spent, and the red glow of the burning town was a distant, ugly stain on the horizon. They reached the sacred circle of stones just as the stars, bright and indifferent, began to appear. Tala was there. She had brought others, old women, children, and the elder who had warned Wiyaka. They had seen the smoke and fled to the high ground. Tala immediately went to Wiyaka, her face grim as she saw the new burns on his arms, the blood that had soaked through his bandage. She began to work, her hands silent and efficient. Nora, her body finally surrendering to the pain and exhaustion, sat, her hands still clutching the charred map. Miguel huddled by the small, smokeless fire. Reed, his old body aching, stared at the ledger, now smeared with mud. The elder, his face like carved wood in the starlight, came to them. He looked at the map. He looked at the ledger. He looked at their faces, faces of soot and defeat. He did not speak. He sat. He took a small, single-headed drum and began to tap it. A low, slow heartbeat. A quiet, wordless chant rumbled in his chest. The grass whispered. The wind was the only other sound. He was asking for guidance. He was asking the ancestors, the land itself, for permission to use these white man's tools, this paper truth, this ledger of lies. Nora sat beside Wiyaka as Tala finished. She was shaking. He called me a traitor, she whispered. And he was right. This is all my fault. From the beginning. Wiyaka turned to look at her. His face was grim. My signature, she said, the words a confession she had held for too long. I signed his contract. I was so desperate to save my farm. I gave him the rite of passage. I gave him the legal right to do all of this. I am the one who let him in. The tears finally came, washing clean streaks in the grime on her face. Wiyaka looked at the valley below, his home, now in shadow. My burden is not so simple, he said, his voice low. I saw the fire. I saw Pike. My body, my blood, screamed for me to kill him. It was the warrior's way, the way Red Owl would have demanded. He looked at his people, huddled by the stones. But I have been listening to you, to the elder. I am trying this new path, this paper path, and where has it led me? I am a fugitive. My sister is a fugitive. My people are in danger. The young men see me as weak. I am trying to save their land, but I may be destroying their spirit. They sat in silence, their shared guilt a bond, a heavy blanket in the cold night air. The drumming stopped. The silence that fell was absolute. The elder rose. He came to the fire. The spirits are quiet, he said, his voice a dry rustle. They are watching. They do not trust the paper. They do not trust the law. He looked at the small, defiant community. But they trust the water. The vow is not to paper. The vow is to protect the water. That is the only truth. A new strength, a spiritual power, rose from the small group. It was not anger. It was certainty. We protect the water, Tala said, her voice clear. Amos Reed, his body broken but his spirit forged, stood up. He picked up the muddy ledger. They are right. We cannot hide. If we hide, we are everything Creed said we were. We are thieves. We are outlaws. Nora, her tears dried, stood with him. The shame was gone, burned away in the fire. He is right. Creed works in the dark. He uses fire and lies. We have to face him in the light. She looked at Wiyaka. She put her hand on the charred map. We have the truth. This map, this ledger. It is all we have. Wiyaka looked at his people. He looked at the sacred stones and the valley beyond. He saw Nora, not as a white woman, but as a person who had been burned and had not broken. He made his decision. We will not be hunted in the hills, he said, his voice clear and carrying in the night air. We will not hide. We will ride down to the plain. We will face them in the daylight. We will bring the truth, and we will let the people, not Creed's judge, decide. The dawn on Moonwater Ridge was not a gentle thing. It was a blade. The sun cut the horizon, spilling a light so clear and cold it seemed to burn away all shadows, leaving only the truth. The small, fugitive community gathered at the sacred circle of stones, their faces raw with exhaustion and stained with soot. They had survived the night. Now, they had to face the day. The elder had finished his long, quiet chant. He rose, his old bones stiff, and looked at the two who stood in the center, Nora Hale and Thede Wiyaka. They were a strange sight. A white woman in a scorched, torn dress, her hair wild, her hands raw from the fire. A Lakota warrior, his arm bound in a bloody bandage, his face a mask of grim resolve. They were not two worlds. They were one, forged in the courthouse fire. He had spent the last hour, as the sky turned from black to purple, watching her. He had watched her re-roll the charred map, her hands tender, as if she were swaddling a child. He had seen the way she spoke to Amos Reed, her voice no longer pleading, but commanding. He had seen her walk to the edge of the ridge and look down at the valley, her valley, his valley, and he had seen her back straighten. She was not a victim. She was not a widow. She was a woman who had, at last, chosen her ground. She turned and found him watching. Her eyes, clear in the new light, met his. The shame of the night before, her confession, was gone. In its place was a simple, terrifying clarity. He did not offer his hand. He did not speak of love. This was not a moment for the soft words of the whites or the long courtship of his own people. This was a vow, harder than iron, forged between two survivors. "You came back for the map," he said, his voice quiet. "It is the truth," she said. "It is all we have." "No," he said, and he took a step toward her. So close she could see the fire of the sunrise reflected in his dark eyes. "We have this ground, this water, this moment. I have been a warrior. I have tried to be a peacemaker. I did not know what path to take. And now," she whispered. "You showed me," he said. "The path is not in the paper. It is in the choice. You chose to save the map. You chose to face the fire. You chose me on the ridge." "We chose each other," she corrected, her voice as firm as his. "We chose the water." He looked at her, and for the first time, a true, slow smile touched his mouth. It was a smile of respect, deeper than any passion. "Nora Hale," he said, "you are a strong heart. I did not know a heart like yours could exist." She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. It was a feeling of being seen, truly for the first time in her life. "Thede Wiyaka," she said, her voice catching. "I did not know a man like you could exist." "Then we will have to protect this," he said. He did not mean the land. He meant the fragile, impossible thing between them. She knew what he was asking. In front of the elder, in front of Tala, who was watching with a fierce, proud gaze, in front of Amos Reed and Miguel, they made their pledge. "I choose this path, Thede Wiyaka," Nora said, her voice clear in the cold morning air. "I choose this ground, and I choose to stand by you." He met her gaze. "I choose this life, Nora Hale," he said, his voice a low, binding oath. "I choose this fight, and I choose to stand by you, chosen forever." It was done. The vow was made. There was no kiss, no touch. There was only the solemn, unbreakable weight of their shared promise. The elder raised his hands. A blessing. The sun was fully up. It was time. They rode down from the high country, not as fugitives, but as an army. It was a small, strange army. Wiyaka and 3 of his best warriors, including Red Owl, who now rode with a silent, grim respect. Nora, her father's rifle on her saddle. Amos Reed, his old badge polished, the muddy ledger secure in his bag. And Miguel Ortega, his arms stiff, his eyes bright with a new, terrifying purpose. They did not ride to the burned courthouse. They rode to the open plain, to the great grassland that sat between the town and the valley, the place where the bison trail and the railroad survey stakes crossed. They rode to the sacred circle of stones. The town was already there. The fire had broken Red Bluff. The shock, the shared danger, and the sight of their courthouse in ashes had burned away their fear of Creed. They were a confused, angry mob. When they saw Reed, Nora, and the Lakota ride onto the field, They did not run. They gathered. A wave of humanity, wanting, no, demanding, answers. Then Creed came. He rode from the railroad camp, not with the deputy, but with Asher Pike and 20 men, all armed, all wearing the badge of the railroad company. They formed a hard, armed line between the townspeople and Nora's group. "This is an illegal assembly," Creed shouted, his voice carrying over the crowd. "This land is the property of the railroad. I order you to disperse." Amos Reed rode his horse forward into the space between. He held up his hand. "My name is Amos Reed. I am the duly appointed sheriff of this county, and I am not on leave." His voice, the voice of the law they had known for 20 years, silenced the crowd. "Last night," Reed roared, "this man, Silas Creed, burned your courthouse. He did it to hide his crimes." "Lies," Creed screamed. His face, usually so smooth, was a mask of red fury. "He burned it to destroy this," Reed shouted. He pulled the charred map from his saddlebag. He and Nora had spent an hour in the dawn light, reading the scorched edges. The original plat map of Red Bluff County. He unrolled it. It was a ruin, blackened and brittle. But the center was visible. "He burned it, but we saved it, and it shows the truth." The original treaty line, the one my father and your fathers agreed to, is here. He stabbed a finger at a scorched line. It puts the sacred stones, the burial grounds, and all of Moonwater Valley firmly in Lakota territory. A gasp went through the crowd. "His new map, the one he filed by bribing Judge Harlan." Reed held up the muddy ledger. "His own book. With his own payments, he moved the line. He stole this land from them, and he stole your courthouse from you." The crowd surged. A low, animal growl. They looked at Creed, not as a savior, but as a thief. Creed saw it. He saw the tide turn. He saw his dream of a freight hub turning to ash. "Lies, all lies," he screamed. He turned to Pike. "Clear them, clear the field now." Pike smiled. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "Railroad men," he bellowed. "This is a riot. You are authorized to use force fire. A warning." A volley of shots cracked over the heads of the crowd. People screamed. They fell back, panicked. But Wiaka's men did not move. Nora did not move. Reed did not move. "They have a barricade," Miguel suddenly yelled. He pointed. Pike's men, in their efficiency, had fenced off a section of the new rail line, and behind it, trapped, were a dozen railroad workers. The same men who had dug the ditch. Men who had not been paid. They were hostages. "A Pike," Creed yelled. "Get those men out of there." But Pike was not listening. He was enjoying the fight. "Second volley," he ordered. This time, they did not fire in the air. They fired at the ground, the bullets kicking up dust at the feet of the front line. It was a mistake. The crowd did not panic. They became a single, enraged beast. "They're shooting at us," a man yelled. Nora saw her moment. She saw the trapped men. She saw the fear on their faces. "They are just men," she screamed, her voice cutting through the noise. "He will not have any more of us." She kicked her horse, a wild, impossible charge. Not at the guns, but at the fence. For the water for the town. Miguel was a half-second behind her. "Come on," he roared at the townspeople. "He is one man, we are many." And the town, as one, surged forward. Pike's men turned, surprised by the charge, but Wiaka was already moving. "Red Owl now!" "Wiaka!" Red Owl screamed. Not a question, but a war cry. He and the other warriors were not on horseback. They were on foot, and they moved like the wind. They did not charge the guns. They charged the gunmen. They ran low, using the chaos. Wiaka had given them one order: no killing. They were a flurry of motion. They used their lariats, not as weapons, but as tools. They roped rifles from men's hands. They tripped horses. They used the blunt ends of their lances to strike arms and legs. It was not a battle. It was a disarming. Wiaka himself, his wounded arm a fire of pain. tackled 2 gunmen at once, his speed and strength a terrifying thing. He disarmed them, took their pistols, and threw them into the grass, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. The mercenaries, paid to shoot, not to fight, fell apart. Nora reached the fence. She and Miguel threw themselves from their horses, tearing at the new wood with their bare hands. The townspeople, their rage focused, ripped the barricade apart. Pike, seeing his line collapse, his men being routed, his plan in ruins, finally snapped. He was in the middle of the chaos, and he saw one man, the man who had started it, standing like a rock. Amos Reed, the sheriff, was holding the map, a symbol of the truth. Pike raised his rifle. He was a good shot. He aimed, not at the heart, but at the head. A quiet, single shot in the middle of a war. Miguel, his work done, turned from the broken fence. He saw the glint of the sun on the rifle barrel. He saw the aim. He was too far to shout. He did only what he could. He ran. "Sheriff!" he screamed. A single word. He launched his body, a desperate, flying leap. Just as Pike fired, he hit Reed, shoving the older man backward. The shot was deafeningly loud. Miguel's body arched, a strange, terrible spasm. He looked down, a look of profound surprise on his face. A small, red flower was blooming on his shirt, high on his chest. He fell. The sound of the shot and Nora's scream stopped everything. The fighting, the shouting, the chaos. It all stopped. Pike stood with the smoking rifle in his hand. Wiyaka's men had him, but they were frozen. Nora ran, sliding in the dirt, to Miguel. "No! Oh, no! Miguel! Miguel!" Tala was there, pushing her aside, her hands already searching for the wound. Silas Creed, from his small rise, saw it all. He saw Pike, he saw the gun, he saw the town, no longer a mob, but a silent, accusing sea of faces. All turned to him. He saw Wiyaka, his face not angry, but full of a terrible, cold judgment. His nerve broke. This was not a boardroom. This was not a negotiation. This was blood. Creed yanked his horse's head around. He dug in his heels. He did not go to his men. He did not go to Pike. He fled. He ran, his expensive horse churning up the grass, galloping away. A lone, cowardly figure, heading for the one escape route he had left, the one thing he had built, the unfinished railroad bridge. The field was a frozen painting of shock. Silas Creed's fleeing horse was the only thing that moved. Thate Wiyaka stood over Asher Pike, whose rifle had been torn from his hands. Red Owl and 2 other warriors had him, their faces a mask of cold fury. Pike was not fighting. He was staring, stunned, at the chaos he had unleashed. Nora was on her knees in the dirt, her hands over Miguel's. "Tala," she whispered, a desperate plea. Tala was already there. She had pushed through the crowd, her medicine bag in hand. She tore open Miguel's shirt. Her face was grim. "He is alive," she said, her voice a sharp command. "His breath is small. The blood is dark. It missed his heart, but it is deep." She looked at 2 of the railroad workers. "You, take my blanket. You will carry him to my camp. He needs the herbs. Now." The men, who moments before had been prisoners, snapped to her command. Nora looked up from Miguel, her gaze finding Amos Reed. The sheriff was holding his chest, his face pale, not from a wound, but from the shock of his own survival. He saved me," Reed whispered, looking at the young man being lifted. "He saved us all," Nora said, her voice rough. She stood, her hands bloody with Miguel's blood. Wiyaka saw Creed's horse, a frantic speck in the distance, heading for the river, for the raw, skeletal line of the new bridge. He looked at Nora. He did not have to speak. She was already moving toward her horse. This was not finished. "Reed," Wiyaka's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Pike is yours." He handed the cuffed mercenary over to the sheriff, Reed, his eyes hard, took the man with pleasure. "Nora!" Wiaka yelled. He was already on his horse, his wounded arm a screaming protest he ignored. She was mounted a second later, her father's rifle in its scabbard, her face a mask of terrible, cold purpose. They rode, the townspeople, the warriors, the railroad men. All stood and watched them go, a two-person pursuit against the man who had owned their world. The chase was short and desperate. Creed was a fool on a horse, all panic and no skill. But he had a fast mount, and he had a head start. He reached the bank of the river, the water still high and muddy from the rains and the blasting. The bridge was his only escape. It was a skeleton of wood, stretching 200 yards across the churning water. It was built for a train, not for a horse. The ties were laid, but not secured, their spacing uneven, with gaps that showed the deadly brown water 60 feet below. Creed, in his terror, rode his horse onto the structure. The animal screamed, its hooves slipping, catching in the gaps. It went 10 yards before its legs snapped with a sound like a pistol shot. The horse went down, pitching Creed from the saddle. He rolled, his expensive suit tearing, and just barely stopped himself from falling into the river. He scrambled to his feet, leaving the dying horse. He began to run, a clumsy, terrified scramble over the uneven ties. Nora and Wiaka pulled up at the bank. They dismounted, not even bothering to tie their horses. "Nora, stay here," Wiaka said. This is my fight, too," she said, her voice flat. "My signature is on that bridge. I am seeing it to the end." She stepped onto the bridge first. The wind was a solid thing, howling down the canyon, trying to peel her from the structure. The ties rattled. The entire bridge seemed to sway, a living, groaning creature. Wiaka was a step behind her, his feet sure, his balance perfect even on the treacherous wood. They found Creed a third of the way across. He had stopped, paralyzed, too afraid to go forward, unable to go back. He was clinging to a side support, his face a wet, pale mask of terror. "It is over! Creed!" Nora shouted, her voice torn by the wind. He turned, his eyes wide and animal. "You!" he shrieked. "You! It is all your fault. You and your savage. I was bringing civilization. I was bringing progress." "You call this progress?" Nora said, her voice a low, carrying accusation. She gestured to the dying horse, to the shaky, half-built structure. "You call that burning courthouse progress, you call Miguel. Bleeding in the grass. Progress." Creed's own workers, the ones who had followed the chase, had gathered on the bank. They were watching. They were listening. "He poisoned the water," Nora shouted, her voice for them now. "He bribed the judge. He burned the records. He did it all for this, for his line on a map. How many of you has he paid? How many of you did he promise a future to, while he was stealing it from all of us?" "They were weak," Creed screamed, his knuckles white. "The law is for men who are strong enough to buy it. I am a builder. I am the future." "You are a thief," she cried. "You are a man who hides behind paper and burns what he cannot steal, and now you have nowhere left to hide." Creed looked at her, then at Wiaka, who stood silent as a stone, a terrifying, just judge. He saw the workers on the bank, their faces hard, no longer his, but hers. His mind, a thing of calculation and angles, saw only one move left. He lunged. He did not lunge at Wiaka. He lunged at Nora. He was going to take her with him. It was a clumsy, desperate move. Wiaka was faster. He shoved Nora back, his good arm a bar of iron. But the sudden movement, the weight of 3 people on the unstable section, was too much. There was a sound, not a crack, but a low, tearing groan, a sound of wood giving up. It was the section Pike had blasted, the bedrock he had tested and cracked. The piling, its foundation compromised, shifted in the mud. The ties beneath them dropped, buckling. Creed screamed. A high, thin sound. The ties he was on fell away, and he was gone, falling. But his hand caught, a desperate animal grip, on a splintered support joist. He was dangling, his legs kicking over the brown, churning water. Nora was sliding, the ties tilting like a broken plate. She was sliding toward the new, open gap. Wiyaka was on the solid part of the bridge. He did not hesitate. He threw himself flat, his body anchoring him, and his left arm, his wounded arm, shot out. He grabbed her wrist. The pain was a white-hot explosion. His wound, newly bound, tore open. He roared, a sound of pure, animal agony. But he did not let go. He held her. She was dangling, just for a second, her feet off the edge, before he used his legs and his good arm, digging into the wood, to pull. He dragged her, scraping, back onto the solid ties. She lay, gasping. For a second, he was breathing in great, ragged heaves, his blood now a bright, pumping stream onto the wood. They both looked over the edge. Silas Creed was still there. He was 10 feet below them, his fingers slipping, his face a mask of absolute, primal terror. "Help me," he wept. "Please, for the love of God, do not let me fall. I will give you anything. The farm I will give it back. Please." Wiyaka looked at him. He looked at his own bleeding arm. He looked at Nora. This was the man who had tried to kill her. This was the man who had destroyed his water, desecrated his land, and caused Miguel to be shot. Nora saw the question in his eyes. This was the warrior's justice. One move, or rather, no move, and it was over. She put her hand on his good arm. "We cannot," she whispered, her voice raw. He looked at her, searching. "He is not a warrior," she said. "He is just a man. We are not murderers. Wiyaka, we are not him." His face, which had been a mask of stone, softened. He nodded. He was right. She had chosen. "Help me," he grunted. They lay flat on the rattling ties. Wiyaka, his wounded arm now useless, used his good one. Nora used both of hers. They reached down. "Grab my hand, Creed," Nora yelled. He wept, his hand slipping. He reached. Wiyaka grabbed his wrist in a grip of iron. "Now," Wiyaka said to Nora. Together, their muscles straining, they hauled him up. It was a dead weight, a squirming, sobbing weight. They pulled him over the edge, onto the safety of the bridge. He collapsed onto the ties, a shaking, ruined pile of expensive cloth. They did not speak. Wiyaka stood, his blood dripping. Nora stood, her hands trembling. They had done it. They marched him back. It was a long, slow walk. The workers on the bank, who had seen it all, parted for them in silence. They walked him, a prisoner, back to the field. The scene had changed. A wagon, which Nora recognized as belonging to the Deadwood Chronicle. Was there? A man with a notebook was talking, his pencil flying. To Amos Reed. Pike was in chains, tied to a wagon wheel, his face a swollen, purple mask. Amos Reed saw them coming. He saw Creed, his suit in tatters, his face a ruin, being marched between them. The sheriff's face, for the first time in 10 years, showed a kind of peace. He walked over and, without a word, took Creed and snapped a second pair of cuffs onto his wrists. "Silas Creed," Reed said, his voice loud for all to hear. "You are under arrest for the arson of the county courthouse, for conspiracy to defraud, for the attempted murder of—" He looked at Miguel's waiting wagon. "Of Miguel Ortega. And for this," he held up the muddy ledger, "in front of God, the town council, and the press, I present this." He read the names, he read the amounts, the judge's name, the assessor's name, the deputy's name. With every word, the crowd, which had been so close to a mob, became a silent, cold jury. When he was done, he held up the charred map. And this, the truth. He burned it to hide it. But they, he pointed to Nora and Wayaka, saved it. The line is clear. Moonwater Valley belongs to the Lakota. The president of the council, the lumberman, stepped forward, his face pale. This is a disaster. The railroad. The railroad, the reporter from Deadwood said, his voice sharp. We'll have to change its route. He looked at Creed, a predator who had found his story. And its president. The town was silent. Then, one of the railroad workers, the one who had helped carry Miguel, stepped forward. We have not been paid in 6 weeks, he said, his voice rough. Not since Pike took over. He said the money was tied up. Creed's assets, the reporter noted, would be seized to pay for the new courthouse, to pay the men he had cheated, and to pay for the damage to the Moonwater. The crowd, finally, understood. It was over. It was not a victory that felt like cheering. It felt like breathing. After a lifetime of choking, the Lakota warriors, who had stood apart, watched. The townspeople looked at them, and for the first time, they did not see savages. They saw neighbors. They saw men who had been wronged, and who had, in the end, fought for justice, not revenge. Wayaka walked to Nora, his blood leaving a trail on the grass. He said nothing. He just looked at her. Tala, Nora said, her voice shaking. He needs you. He shook his head, a small movement. It is done, he said. He looked at the field, at Pike in chains, at Creed in cuffs, at the town and his people. Standing, finally, on the same unbroken ground, it is done. The world, which had been compressed into a single, frantic day of smoke and blood, slowly began to expand again. The pace of things, which had been a panicked gallop, slowed to the steady, aching rhythm of mending. The first mending was of the body. Tala's camp, once a hidden refuge, became the center of the new Red Bluff. She set up a healing tent, large and open, and her authority was absolute. Miguel Ortega lay there, a pale shadow, for 6 days. His breath was a small, fragile thing, but Tala fought for it. She used the willow bark for his fever and a root, chewed into a paste, to keep the wound from poisoning him. Nora sat with him, cleaning the bandages, offering him water. On the 4th day, his eyes, which had been cloudy with fever, focused on her. Señora, he whispered. Rest, Miguel, she said, her hand on his. Tala, she is a good doctor. He smiled, a weak, small thing. You saved us. No, Miguel, she said, her voice thick. You saved us. You saved the sheriff. You saved the truth. Wayaka, too, was a patient. His arm, torn open on the bridge, had been stitched by his sister's practiced hand. He sat, his back against a lodgepole, and watched. He watched the townspeople come, one by one. They came not with demands, but with gifts. Mrs. Davies, the mercantile owner, brought a bolt of clean linen for bandages. The blacksmith, who had been on Pike's side, brought a smoked ham for the families. They came to see Miguel, the man who had taken a bullet for their sheriff. And in doing so, they sat on Lakota blankets and drank Tala's herb tea. The healing was not just in Miguel's chest. It was in the tent. While the bodies mended, the paper war was settled. The Deadwood Chronicle had crucified Silas Creed. His empire, built on lies and leveraged debt, collapsed when the ledger was published. A new man came from the east, a Mr. Bowen, who represented the railroad's investors. He was a quiet, pale man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a face that held no malice, only an exhausted expression of finance. He met with Nora in the saloon, which was now the temporary courthouse. Amos Reed sat with her. Mrs. Hale, Mr. Bowen said, his voice dry as dust. Your hauling contract with Mr. Creed is, of course, nullified by his felonious actions. The railroad is deeply apologetic. My farm, Nora said, her voice flat. The railroad holds it. It does. Mr. Bowen said. He looked at his papers. There is. However, the matter of compensation. The railroad is prepared to offer a significant sum to the town for the courthouse, and to you, Mrs. Hale, for everything. It is enough to buy your farm 10 times over. Nora looked at Amos Reed. She saw the relief in his eyes. She would be a wealthy woman. She thought of the moonwater, of the dead fish, of the blood on the grass. I do not want your money. Nora said, Mr. Bowen looked up, his pale eyes blinking. I do not understand. I want my farm. I will pay the note. She said, but the railroad will also pay. You still need timber for the new line. You still need it hauled. We do, Mr. Bowen agreed, wary. I will fulfill my contract. Nora said, but not his. I will provide the timber, but I will do it my way. She explained. She called it green logging, a term her father had used. No clear-cutting, no blasting. Her crews, made up of the same railroad men Creed had abandoned, would go in on horseback. They would take only the deadfall, the diseased trees, and a careful selection of the old growth, leaving the young forest to breathe. It will be slow, Mr. Bowen said, calculating. It will be right, Nora said. And the price will be the exact amount of my farm's debt. That is your compensation. You will pay for the timber, and I will use that money to pay you back. It was a clean, perfect circle. Bowen, seeing the sense in it and seeing Amos Reed's hard stare, agreed. Nora paid off her farm in 4 months. The land was hers, bought not with blood money, but with honest, sustainable work. The town council, purged of its corrupt members, met next. The lumberyard owner, his face pale, nominated Amos Reed for mayor. Reed refused. I am a sheriff, he said. That is all I have ever wanted to be. But this council has a first job. We have to honor the truth. He unrolled the charred map. It was their new constitution. The council voted unanimously to adopt the original treaty lines. But Wiyaka, who had been invited to speak, stood. It is not enough to give us the paper, he said, his voice quiet but filling the room. The land does not want a master. It wants a protector. It was Nora who proposed the solution. The Moonwater Valley, from the sacred stones to the river bend, would be declared the Moonwater Preserve. It would not be owned by the town, nor by the Lakota. It would be held in trust. For all time, it would be co-managed by a board of 3. The council nominated Nora Hale. The Lakota nominated Tala, and the 2 of them, as their first act, nominated Amos Reed. The mending of the land and the paper was complete. Now, the spirit. Tala declared the spring. The breath of the moon was finally clean. The diversion channel had allowed the silt to settle, and the earth to heal its wound. The elder declared it was time for a ceremony of thanksgiving for the water. It was a Lakota ceremony. It was ancient, and it was theirs. But a message was sent to Red Bluff, an invitation. They came. At sunset, the townspeople walked from Red Bluff. They were not confident. They were quiet, hesitant. Mrs. Davies came, the blacksmith, the workers. They brought their children. They stood, hats in their hands, on the outside of the great circle of stones. The drums began, a single, low heartbeat, then another. The Lakota began to sing. It was not a war song. It was a song of thanks, a song to the wind that had blown the smoke away, a song to the earth that held the water, a song to the water itself. Wiyaka stood with his people, his voice part of the song. He saw Nora. She was standing with the townspeople, but her eyes were closed, her face turned to the sound, as if she were drinking it in. The singing stopped. The elder stood, his arms raised. He spoke in Lakota, in Tala's voice, clear in the twilight. Translated. "The water does not belong to us," she said, her voice carrying over the field. "We belong to the water. It is the blood of our mother. It gives life. Today. We thank it. We thank it for staying. We thank it for forgiving us." The townspeople, who had come to conquer, stood in the dusk and, for the first time, learned what it was to be humble. The world settled. Sheriff Reed sat in his new office, in the rebuilt courthouse, and wrote his final report. He wrote about the arson, the conspiracy, and the fraud. He wrote about the battle on the field. He officially, on paper, exonerated Nora Hale, Dade Wiyaka, and Miguel Ortega, naming them as heroes of the county. He published the report in the Chronicle, sealing the new truth in ink. "Mr. Bowen, the railroad man, came to Wiyaka's camp. The line must still be built," he said. "We have investors, but we will honor the preserve. The route must go north." "That is hard country," Wiyaka said. "The ground is soft, the rivers are wide." "So we have been told," Bowen said. "We would like to hire you, Mr. Wiyaka, as a consultant, to guide our surveyors, to tell us where we can go and where we must not." Wiyaka looked at the man. He was being paid to do what he had tried to do for free. It was a new kind of battle, a new way to be a protector. "I will," he said. Nora, her farm secure, her name cleared, found herself with a purpose, but no path. She walked through her father's barn, the stalls empty. It was a large, sturdy building. It was wasted. She thought of the children, the Lakota children, who knew the earth, the town children, who knew the paper. Neither knew the other. She spent a week. She cleared the hay. She built 3 small tables and 4 benches. She took her father's collection of books, his maps, his slates, and she set them out. She opened a school. Her first students were a strange mix. 2 were the children of the mercantile owner, scrubbed and shy. 3 were Lakota, sent by Tala, who wanted them to learn the power of the white man's written word. Nora taught them reading. She taught them sums, and she taught them, all of them, how to read a map, how to find the moon water, how to see the lines, and to know what they were worth. The days grew shorter. Autumn came. Wiyaka had been gone for 2 weeks, riding the new line with the surveyors. He returned one afternoon, the smell of pine in the cold high country on him. He did not go to his camp. He rode to her farm. He found her in the barn. The sun was low, slanting through the open door, lighting the dust in the air. She was at a slate, showing a small Lakota boy how to draw his own name. She looked up when his shadow fell across the floor. Her heart, which had been so still for so long, gave a sudden, hard kick. "You are back," she said, her voice quiet. "I am back," he said. He looked at the crude tables, at the children who were now staring at him with wide, curious eyes. "You are building again." "I am," she said. She dismissed the children, who scattered into the afternoon light, their voices high and laughing. They were alone in the quiet barn. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was full. "Miguel is walking," she said. "I know," Wiyaka replied. "He is at my camp. He is teaching. He is teaching the young men English. He is not a good teacher." Nora smiled. "I am sure he is terrible." He stepped out of the shadow, into the light. He looked at her, his gaze intense, the way it had been on the ridge, on the bridge. "You did not leave the town. It is safe now. You could have left." "This is my home," she said. "The farm." "Is it?" he asked. He took another step. He was close now. close enough for her to see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes and the new, quiet strength in his face. "On the ridge," he said, his voice low. "You made a vow. You chose this ground." "I did," she whispered. "You chose to stand by me," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He reached out, his hand, the one that had held the knife, the one that had pulled her from the fire, was steady. He did not touch her face. He touched her hair, a strand that had come loose, his rough fingers impossibly gentle. "I am not a peacemaker, nor a Hale," he said, "and I am not just a warrior." "I know what you are," she said, her voice shaking, just slightly. He let his hand fall to her shoulder. The touch was a brand, a warmth that spread through her. It was not the desperate, frantic touch of the battle. It was a choice. "I am here," he said, "and I am not leaving." It was a promise. It was the beginning. The winter was hard, as all winters are in the high plains, but it was a winter of peace. The mending, which had begun in Tala's tent, spread. The town rebuilt its courthouse, using Nora's green-cut timber. The railroad, under Mr. Bowen's quiet management, paid its workers on time, and the new survey line, guided by Wiyaka, curved north, a scar on the land, but a scar that respected its heart. Spring came, not as a blade, but as a slow, green sigh. It was a spring unlike any Red Bluff had ever known. The water in the Moonwater Preserve ran so clear, you could see the pebbles on the stream bed. The grass on the plains grew thick and high, and in the first week of the new grass, the bison returned. They were a distant brown cloud at first, a smudge on the horizon, but then they were a river, thousands of them, moving with the old, slow thunder of the earth. They came to the edge of the preserve, grazing on the land that had been saved, and the town, for the first time, did not see them as a resource, but as a sign. The land was healing. On a day in late spring, when the wild roses were in bloom, Nora Hale and Thete Wiyaka were joined. It was not a wedding in a church, and it was not a grand Lakota ceremony. It was both, and it was neither. It was theirs. They stood in the sacred circle of stones on Moonwater Ridge. There was no preacher. The elder stood as a witness, his face turned to the sun. Amos Reed stood, his hat in his hands. Tala stood, her face a rare, open smile. Miguel, who now walked with a slight limp but whose eyes were bright, stood beside her, his hand resting on a new, carved walking stick. The town came. The Lakota came. They did not stand on separate sides. They mingled, a quiet, respectful crowd, their presence a testament to the fire they had all walked through. Nora wore a simple, blue dress, the color of the sky. Wiyaka wore his finest beaded vest, but his feet were in his worn moccasins. He was a man of the earth. He did not give her a ring. He gave her a single eagle feather, which he tied, gently, in her hair. She did not give him a ring. She gave him a book, her father's old leather-bound journal, the one he had started, the one she had finished. "You chose this ground," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying in the clean air. "You chose this life," he replied. It was all the vows they needed. They were chosen forever. In the center of the preserve, on the spot where Pike had been captured, the town and the Lakota together raised a single, great stone. Miguel, who had a surprising skill, carved the words. It took him a month. The words were in 2 languages, in English, and in the flowing symbols of the Lakota. They said the same thing. Water is life. Freedom is a vow. The railroad was finished. It brought noise and smoke and new people, but it also brought a living. The town grew, but it grew around the preserve, not over it. It grew with a respect that had been beaten into it. The news from Deadwood was final. Silas Creed, his crimes undeniable, was sentenced to 20 years in the federal prison. His assets, his stocks, his land, his rail shares were all seized. A great portion of the money was put into a new fund, by order of the court, the Moonwater Trust, it was called. It paid for the new courthouse. It paid for the salaries at Nora's school, which now had a proper building in town. And it paid for the permanent protection of the preserve. His greed, in the end, had saved the land. Asher Pike was never seen again. He had disappeared from his cell the night before his trial. And Amos Reed, when asked, just cleaned his badge and said the world was full of dark corners for dark men. Nora's school thrived, but she was not just a teacher. In the quiet evenings, in the cabin she now shared with Wiyaka, she wrote, she filled her journal, and then another. She wrote about the fire, she wrote about the water, she wrote about the trial, she wrote about the law, and about justice. A year later, the Deadwood Chronicle published it. Not all at once, but in pieces, every Sunday. They called it the Moonwater Diaries. It was not a grand piece of writing. It was simple, and it was honest. It told the story of a community that had been broken and had chosen to heal. It told of justice that was not revenge, and of courage that was found in the most unlikely of places. It was a story of a Lakota man, a widow, a sheriff, and a laborer who had, together, chosen a different way. The story ends, as all stories must, but it does not truly end. The future is not a simple, happy thing. It is a human thing. It is complicated, and it is bright, and it is full of work. But it is a future they chose. On a warm summer evening, you can see them. Nora is on the porch of her cabin, reading a book. Wiyaka is in the barn, not mending a harness, but helping a small Lakota boy and a small white boy build a new, stronger table for the school. The wind, the same cold wind that once carried red dust, now moves through the high grass of the Moonwater Preserve, and it carries the sound of the grass, the sound of the water, and, very faintly, the sound of a drum from the distant camp. It is not a sound of war, it is the sound of a heartbeat. Choosing each other, they had learned, was not a single moment. It was not a vow made on a hill. It was a choice made every day. It was not just a feeling. It was a way of life. Thank you so much for listening to our story. I am curious. Where in the world are you listening from? Please let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts and say hello. If you enjoyed this tale, please show your support for Wild West Tales by subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by many more.